when she was setting off to go shopping, and she kissed me on the cheek, and she laughed because she got lipstick on me again, and she was always doing that. And I sort of went, oh, and rubbed it off, and she walked out the back door. She just said bye, and I said bye back, and said don't be late for your dinner, and she was gone. That's when it really hits you then, when you suddenly get a policeman in your house and you're actually having to say that your daughter's missing, and you don't know why or where she is.
It looked like, well, there was this bag in a duvet cover. I noticed then that there was a kind of shallow grave dug around it. So I went to see the police. As the policeman cut down the bag, I saw a sock, and I realised then that we'd actually found a body.
As Leanne Tiernan disappeared into the dim, unlit path that was Huffley Grill, she had little idea of the monster that lay in wait up ahead. That was the last time she was seen alive. 7 months later, a dog walker made a gruesome discovery in Lindley Woods. Wrapped in plastic, hidden in a shallow grave, Leanne's body held a secret of its own, revealing a truth far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from around the world. Today we delve into the case of Leanne Tiernan and show you how a brilliant group of investigators got a monster behind bars. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon below, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Bramley is located in the city of Leeds, West Yorkshire, England. It's a residential area located just 3 miles from Leeds city centre. Bramley's most notable feature is probably Bramley Park, a beautiful, well-maintained community park found in the center of Bramley. The park features stunning countryside views with multiple sports pitches, picnic areas, and a playground for children, amongst other things. Leanne Tiernan grew up in Bramley. She was born to parents Michael and Sharon on September 27, 1984. Leanne had one sister, Michelle, who was a few years older than her. Michael and Sharon separated at some point during Leanne's childhood, but it doesn't seem that this greatly affected her or her relationship with either parent. She lived with her mom and sister in Bramley and often saw her dad. Sharon, Michelle, and Leanne all had a great family dynamic. They even called themselves the Three Musketeers. Leanne was the type of girl who could light up a room. She was bubbly, bright, and had the most beautiful smile. Leanne was also very thoughtful of those around her and a deeply caring person, an attribute she showed on the day she vanished. In the year 2000, Leanne was 16 years old. As a teenager, she loved attending parties and spending time with her friends, but Leanne always made time for her grandmother. The pair went to church together every Sunday, which is exactly what they did on Sunday, November 16th. On that chilly winter's day, Leanne woke up and got herself ready for her usual Sunday itinerary. She went to church with her grandmother, and once the service was finished, Leanne stayed on for Sunday school. Then she went back to her grandmother's house for a bit before heading back home. Leanne had made plans with her friend Sarah Whitehouse for the two to go shopping for Christmas gifts in the Leeds city center. Once she was ready, Leanne grabbed her bag and said goodbye to her mom. Sharon had no idea that this was the last time she saw her beautiful Leanne alive. Leanne and Sarah had a great time together. At around 4:30 p.m., they got back on the bus for Bramley. Leanne's next decision had disastrous consequences, but she had no way of knowing. Instead of getting off at her usual stop, she got off with Sarah at Howley Lane, the street that Sarah lived on. She would usually have gotten off a few stops further down the road. Leanne wanted to make sure her friend got home safe and wasn't worried about the walk home. The friends said goodbye before parting ways. One of them would reach home, the other wouldn't. Leanne could have walked along the main road, but she decided to rather take a shortcut through Holy Grill, a secluded footpath lined with trees. Sarah watched her friend disappear into the darkness. She was never seen again alive. It was now around 5 p.m., and since it was November, wintertime for the Northern Hemisphere, it was dark at this point. Leanne's walk home should have taken roughly 20 minutes. The path through Holly Grill was like a route Leanne was familiar with, but that didn't change the fact that there were no streetlights to illuminate her path. At 5:30 p.m., Sarah rang Leanne's home phone. Sharon answered the call, and Sarah asked her if she could speak to her friend. Sharon was slightly confused. Leanne wasn't home yet. When she told Sarah that, Sarah began to worry. She told Leanne's mom that she had been home for some time now, and Leanne should have been back herself. Sarah's repeated calls to Leanne's phone had gone unanswered. Sharon told her she should try to get hold of her daughter. She hung up the phone and started calling Leanne's number. Multiple calls would ring through to the voicemail before Sharon's final call to her daughter was cut off after a few rings. Leanne's phone had either been shut off or her call had been declined. Neither of these seemed like reasonable things that Leanne would do. Sharon was trying not to jump to conclusions. Maybe Leanne had stopped at a friend's house. Maybe she had an explanation for being late. While it was unlike her, Sharon didn't want to think of the worst-case scenario. She waited for an hour or so, hoping Leanne would stroll through the door at any second. When that still didn't happen, she called the authorities and reported her daughter missing. The disappearance of Leanne was taken seriously from the get-go. It wasn't brushed off as a runaway case, and before Sharon knew it, she had officers on her doorstep. After finding out from Sarah that Leanne had last been seen going to Holly Grill, they focused their search efforts there. The possibility of Leanne possibly injuring herself somewhere along the path was quickly ruled out. It was dark out, but officers had torches to illuminate the way, and there was no sign of Leanne. As the sun rose the following day, the search continued. The focus was still on Holly Grill. Maybe now, with some light coming through, investigators could pick up something that gave them an idea of what had happened to Leanne. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Door-to-door inquiries were being conducted at the same time. You see, despite the secluded look of Holly Grill, it's not actually that far from a residential area. Someone may have heard something, or maybe one of those people were even responsible for Leanne's disappearance. The investigation that followed saw West Yorkshire police conduct over 1,400 house-to-house inquiries, with 800 of those being along the route Leanne took. This was referred to as the Red Route by investigators. Around 800 sheds and outbuildings were also searched, as well as 150 commercial properties near Holly Grill. However, it seemed as though they had nothing to go on. Leanne had seemingly vanished into thin air. The police interviewed 140 men in connection with the investigation, all of which had DNA samples taken. 12 search warrants were carried out on various homes and addresses across Leeds. When they still hadn't found Leanne, they turned to underwater divers. The West Yorkshire Police Underwater Search Unit searched a 3-mile segment of the Leeds and Liverpool Canal between Spring Garden Loch and Bramley Falls. A large portion of the canal had even been drained to a depth of only 1 meter. Various drain shafts were also explored, along with drains and wells that weren't in use. It seemed like the West Yorkshire Police had left no stone unturned. But still, the question remained: where was Leanne Tiernan? On December 3rd, just over 2 weeks after Leanne was last seen, the authorities staged a reconstruction of Sarah and Leanne's movements. Sarah herself participated, with Michelle, Leanne's older sister, taking her place. Speaking of their goal for the reconstruction, Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg, who was heading up the search for Leanne, said, "We are hoping that by recreating the events of last Sunday, it may help to jog people's memories as to any possible sightings of Leanne." The day after the reconstruction was performed, the police released a composite of a man who had been spotted walking his dog around Holly Grill when Leanne went missing. He was described as 5 feet 8 inches tall and of stocky build, with a round reddish face that may possibly be scarred, wearing a black woolen hat, a 3/4 length waterproof jacket, and dirty jeans. By this stage, Leanne's phone had been turned off. It had been briefly activated on November 27th, 11 days after she disappeared, but efforts to try to track the phone went nowhere. To try to drum up more interest in the case and pursue people to come forward, a local business kindly offered a £10,000 reward. To try to show Leanne's face to move people across the country, Iceland, a supermarket chain, printed her picture and information on milk cartons that were sold countrywide. With the attention Leanne's case was getting, various reports came in of potential sightings across the country. Unfortunately, none of these could be confirmed. Before they knew it, 9 months had passed, and the authorities seemed no closer to finding Leanne. On August 20th, 2001, Mark Bisson was taking his dog for a walk through Lindley Woods, which borders North and West Yorkshire, something he often did. But that day, Mark made a gruesome discovery. A body had been discovered wrapped in a floral duvet cover and buried in a shallow grave. The police were notified and rushed to the scene. Inside the floral duvet cover was the body of a girl. She had been wrapped in multiple green plastic bin liners and then tied with twine. Her head was covered with a black bin liner, kept in place by a dog collar that was tightly fastened around her neck. Her hands were bound together with multiple cable ties, which were also found around her neck. Once the post-mortem examination was concluded, police would announce publicly that the body belonged to 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan. She had been strangled to death. However, there was something curious about the condition of her body. In the 9 months since she disappeared, it seemed that her body had only partially decomposed. Had Leanne been alive for months after she vanished? No, she had been frozen. The fact that Leanne's body had not been buried for 9 months meant investigators were hopeful that there would be a decent amount of forensic evidence on her body. Unfortunately, they could not find any of her killer's DNA on her body. But that didn't mean they had nothing. Numerous officers were brought in to conduct a fingertip search of the woodland where Leanne's body was found. Entomologists were brought in to see if they could give a more accurate timeline for when they believed Leanne's body had been buried in the woods. After their examination, they believed she had been in Lindley Woods for no more than 1 to 3 weeks. She had been likely killed shortly after she went missing. 7 days before Leanne's body had been found, a woman driving past Lindley Woods witnessed a man on the side of the road lifting what looked like a bundle of rags and material out of his car. At the time, she didn't give it much thought. People dumping unwanted stuff in wooded areas was hardly unusual. When she heard of the body that had been found, what she saw that day suddenly clicked. Leanne's funeral was held on September 28th, the day after what would have been her 17th birthday. The service was held in Bramley, less than a mile from where she disappeared. Sharon, Michelle, and Sarah helped carry Leanne's white coffin into Stanford Methodist Church, the same church where Leanne was baptized as a child. Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg also attended the funeral to pay his respects. He spent the last 9 months trying to find Leanne and must have grown very close to her family during that time. Roughly 100 people packed into the modest church while others waited outside. Leanne's favorite hymns were sung, and Sister Janet Durbin paid her respects to Leanne, saying, "Leanne was a normal, happy, fun-loving teenager, half child, half young lady. She still loved to spend time with her grandma and granddad, enjoying walking to church on Sunday mornings. One of her uncles still called her his chocolate chip niece because of her love of chocolate. Whatever your memories, cherish them. They're like gifts that no one can take away from you," she added. Once the service concluded, Leanne was laid to rest at nearby Hilltop Cemetery. Leanne's autopsy and subsequent forensic testing gave the investigators some evidence to go on. Her hair, which was still in a ponytail like it had been when she disappeared, had multiple different types of pollen in it. The pollen was linked to privet, plum trees, and poplar trees. There was also evidence that Leanne had been near a bonfire at some point. A tiny red fiber was found on the back of Leanne's jumper. This was eventually linked to a carpet, which would play an important role in the future conviction of her killer. A ton of animal hair, which was presumed to belong to a dog, was also found on the duvet cover. Believing that Lindley Woods likely held some sort of significance to the killer, police made a public appeal for anyone who was in the area in the weeks leading up to Leanne's discovery to come forward. They also requested information about anyone who had shown a particular interest in the woods. It was that question that got the response. 2 women came forward, separately, to mention the name of a past boyfriend, John Taylor. The women had both met Taylor through Lonely Hearts columns, and each told a story of how Taylor told them of his poaching escapades in Lindley Woods. John Taylor was born on August 27, 1956, in Leeds. He lived in the same housing estate as Leanne, just a mile from where she had been last seen. Locals knew him as the Pet Man, due to the vast number of animals he kept inside his home. He also sold pet food. Despite his odd animal habits, neighbors thought of Taylor as ordinary. He had just one previous criminal conviction, and that was from stealing a suit as a teenager. While police were trying to find out more about the items used to dispose of Leanne's body, they also started to investigate John Taylor. They discovered that he was a frequent user of Lonely Hearts columns. When they spoke to former partners of Taylor, they had worrying things to say about him. One woman said Taylor liked to tie women up and lock them inside cupboards. Another said that he liked whips, ties, and to be dominating. One of the former girlfriends that first mentioned his name to police said that when she lived with Taylor, they frequently visited Lindley Woods. She eventually ended the relationship after feeling his desires were violating. When investigators spoke to her about how Taylor would tie her up, she told them that he would use 3 cable ties, one around each wrist and another to link them behind her back. This was how Leanne was found. All of this was circumstantial, though. The police needed concrete evidence that tied Taylor to Leanne, and they found just that. They found that a company in Nottingham had manufactured the leather dog collar used on Leanne's body. This proved to be not entirely helpful, as that same manufacturer sent thousands of collars out over 200 wholesalers. In an effort to narrow down their search, investigators focused on pet supply stores closest to Bramley that stocked the collars. Detective Constable David Wilson contacted each one of them, hoping that they kept some sort of record of who purchased that item. It took 111 tries before the 112th company he contacted. Pets Pajamas in Liverpool sent Wilson a list of the 3 customers who purchased that specific collar. One of the names was John Taylor. It was now the second time his name had come up in the investigation. The other thing that investigators were focusing on was the yellow zip tie in particular. While the others were both more generic ones, the yellow ones were made in the UK and were primarily supplied to the Royal Mail. In fact, 90% of these ties were distributed to the Royal Mail. When the investigators were looking into John Taylor, they uncovered that he was a parcel delivery worker for Parcel Force, which happens to be part of the Royal Mail. Taylor was arrested on October 16, 2001, on suspicion of murder. He lived alone at the time after his wife had divorced him 5 years prior. His house was immediately sealed off and thoroughly searched, as were his gardens and wasteland patch at the back of his property. Various parts of the garden were excavated, and 3 large chest freezers were found on the scene. Each of them underwent a thorough examination over around 10 days. When Taylor was first questioned, he denied any involvement in Leanne's case. The investigators then asked him if he had a dog. This was because of the dog hair they found. Since the investigators hadn't found the suspect's DNA on Leanne's body, they focused on being able to positively identify this dog. If they could match the dog hair found with Leanne to a dog in someone's home, it certainly would serve as solid evidence that she was there. Some of the hairs still had the root attached, which meant they could send it off for testing. Researchers at the University of Texas were put to the task. They were able to retrieve a partial DNA profile from the dog successfully. Taylor's house was rather messy. It was clear he didn't do much cleaning. In his kitchen, a newspaper with a front-page article about Leanne was found. Whether Taylor was relishing in the murder or trying to find out more about the investigation is uncertain. Maybe it was a bit of both. There were no carpets in his home, but it was clear that there were rooms where carpeting had been ripped up in the last year. Closely examining the nails that still remained on the floor, forensic examiners recovered tiny fibers from the former carpet. This turned out to be the exact same fiber that was found on Leanne. Multiple other dog collars of the same model were branded as one on Leanne were also found in the home. Twine was found in his property that matched the twine used on Leanne. Serial numbers found on zip ties also confirmed that they were the same ones used on her. Remember that investigators had reason to believe that Leanne had been near some sort of fire? The garden revealed former evidence of bonfires, likely used to burn the carpets pulled from the house. Plants found in the garden also matched the pollen found on Leanne. They made another discovery in the garden. Dead animals. Countless dead pets were uncovered that had been buried in the yard. Many of them had not died from natural causes, including being chopped up with a meat cleaver or hit over the head with a shovel. It turned out that the man who happily went by the pet guy had been sadistically killing animals for many years. Police even found the dog they believed had contributed to the hair found on Leanne. But unfortunately, it was too decomposed to make a positive identification. At this point, that didn't really matter. The authorities had enough evidence to move forward with the trial. When Taylor was confronted with all the evidence found at his house, he made a confession of sorts. After initially trying to say he wasn't involved, Taylor admitted to kidnapping Leanne Tiernan. He told the investigators that he hadn't been to Hofley Grill for many years, but happened to be there when Leanne was walking home. He recounted how she walked past him, and he had a sudden impulse to grab her. Taylor then tied Leanne's hands behind her back with the dog leash and covered her head with his jacket. He walked her to his home in Cockshot Drive. When he got inside, Taylor says he took Leanne upstairs to his bedroom and used the cable ties to tie her hands behind her back. While all this was happening, Leanne's phone was ringing nonstop. It was her mother, Sharon, calling. The thought of Leanne hearing her phone ringing, knowing it was likely her mother trying to find out what was happening, is heartbreaking. Taylor admits to taking Leanne's phone and turning it off. Taylor says a struggle then broke out between the two, and Leanne ended up falling off the bed and hitting her head on the floor. Her head allegedly started bleeding, and then she stopped breathing. The police didn't believe any of this, not only because Taylor was not exactly the most trustworthy source, but also because that wasn't what the evidence showed. Leanne didn't die because of a head injury. She had been strangled to death by the zip tie around her neck. Taylor also denied keeping her body in a freezer. This is despite one of his neighbors saying they saw him getting rid of a freezer around that time Leanne's body was found. He said he kept her body under pallets in his garden before he took her to Lindley Woods. This wasn't physically possible for the condition of her body was found in. On February 15, 2002, Taylor appeared before Mr. Justice Poole and entered a plea of guilty for the abduction of Leanne Tiernan. He was still remanded in custody, awaiting the trial for her murder. On July 8th, on the first day of his trial, John Taylor pleaded guilty to the murder. He was sentenced on that same day. Mr. Justice Still handed Taylor the mandatory term of life imprisonment. Once he'd been sentenced, Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg announced, "We do not believe that this is the first major crime he has committed. We feel that the way this murder was pre-planned and the way he hid and disposed of the body was calculated. We cannot exclude the possibility he has killed before." Since the authorities now had Taylor's DNA on hand, they were able to see if any other crimes committed in the area could be linked to him. They wanted to specifically look into attacks where the women had been violated. Two incidents stood out to them. The first occurred on October 18, 1988, in Gill. A 32-year-old woman was walking through to go and pick up her children from school when she was ambushed by a man wearing a mask and carrying a knife. He forced her to perform actions on him before violating her. The second attack happened on March 1st, 1989. A man, again wearing a mask and wielding a knife, broke into a 21-year-old woman's home. She was undressed, blindfolded, and gagged before being subjected to a heinous assault. On October 2002, John Taylor was formally rearrested and charged with these crimes. Despite his refusal to cooperate, the DNA evidence did all the talking. He eventually pleaded guilty to both crimes on February 4th, 2003. But had Taylor murdered before? Following his subsequent convictions, Chris Gregg said, "We are still concerned that there may be other victims and families who have been affected by Taylor's actions." Gregg added that a diamante necklace found in Taylor's car while they were searching his property in relation to Leanne's case could belong to another victim. When Craig Wood saw the necklace on a documentary about Leanne's case, he immediately knew who it had belonged to: his sister, Deborah Wood. 20-year-old Deborah Wood was last seen leaving Big Lil's bar in Leeds after having a drink with her dad on January 4th, 1996. The young factory worker had then disappeared. Her body was found 10 days later on an embankment near Burley Park rail station in Leeds. She happened to be found just a 12-minute walk away from Taylor Bramley's home. Her body had been burned almost beyond recognition. Following her autopsy, it was concluded that she may have been kept in cold storage in the time between her disappearance and her body being found. They determined this due to alcohol still being present in her system. Craig believes the necklace found in John's car belonged to his sister. About 5 years earlier, a plain-clothed CID officer went around to Mom's house, showed her the jewelry, and said, "Do you recognize any of this jewelry?" She said he didn't even take it out of the bag to show her, Craig recalled. As soon as she said she couldn't recognize it or couldn't even see it, he was gone. When she told me this, I was quite annoyed because if there's any jewelry to be shown, why don't they show my other two sisters or me? But they didn't. It wasn't until Craig watched a documentary on Leanne's murder that he got a good look at the necklace. As he saw it, he thought to himself, "That's Deborah's necklace." The latest revelation in this case came early this year when a manager of the pub where Deborah was last seen revealed John Taylor was a regular there. He was one of them that used to wander around and talk, and it was mainly females he talked to. He was hands-on, putting his arm around them and then rubbing his hand up and down and feeling, said Ellen Moss, one of the men who ran the pub. The younger the female, the better. If you're asking me, did he leave with her that night? I couldn't tell you. But if he'd been in that night, she's gone missing, he'd have been talking to her. John Taylor has repeatedly denied any involvement in other crimes. In October 2018, however, he was convicted of multiple other assaults on women. He is currently imprisoned at HM Prison, Wakefield, where he will remain for many years to come. Authorities know that Taylor often traveled to meet women as part of his job. The likelihood of him having suddenly snapped, killing Leanne in a moment of madness, is highly unlikely. A man who has been committing these types of offenses very possibly had done this before. At least, with Deborah's name still reaching the headlines, her case has not been forgotten. Maybe one day, hopefully in the not-too-distant future, she will receive the justice she deserves. One thing's for sure, the investigators are not giving up on following the cases. If John Taylor has committed other atrocious acts, and there is evidence to prove it, he will continue to rack up convictions. May Leanne Tiernan and all the women infected by John Taylor rest in peace, knowing he is where he belongs, unable to inflict any more pain and suffering onto anyone else. What do you think of today's case? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.